Thanks very much, Bob. Yeah, the name is a bit of a mouthful. We got bought last summer, so it's FDM CCS Insight. Anyway, pleasure to be here. Thanks to Bob and the fantastic organization around this event, and Apkudo as well for setting up this session. What we're looking at in this session is around trust and transparency and that relationship between maybe a lack of trust, what impact that has on the market and how much people buy and how much they spend, what role transparency can play in addressing that trust problem, and then bringing in the topic of digital product passport. I want to give a shout out to the All Things Circular team as well, who gave a fantastic roundtable yesterday, sort of got our thought processes going on this topic. It was very good. So thanks to Peter and Rich for that. You know, thinking about the topic of digital product passport, I'm really pleased to be joined by what we genuinely consider at FDM CCS Insight as an innovative topic. And here we have really the companies who are really pushing the envelope in terms of the topic, in terms of driving things forward at various levels, which we'll explore on this call. Josh, CEO and founder of Apkudo, Craig Feely, head of GVI in North America for Samsung, and Sean from the VP of Mobility from Bstock, who you all know as well, well-known faces on the circuit and in this industry. So yeah, in this session, I'm going to give a quick overview of the market, really just to give a sense of this idea of transparency and trust, which might seem a little bit abstract still to some people in terms of how it affects the dollars spent and how it affects your business. So trying to give a bit of context there, then look at a little bit of consumer research that we've been doing with Apkudo to give a sense of what we're calling, and maybe Kristen came up with this term, but the confusion tax, which I'll explain a little bit more. But you know, it's a nice phrase to highlight this idea of how much is the industry losing as a tax because consumers are lacking confidence in their choices and decision making. And then fundamentally, what role could a DPP play in addressing some of those challenges? You know, I think in this room and at this event, knowledge around the topic of DPP will be very varied. My sense is it will be very low. I think many people, even here today, might be coming to really just understand what do we mean by DPP at the most basic level. I think at best it is abstract. You know, there is nothing about the idea of DPP at the moment that you could say is formulated. This is very much the formative stages of what we think about as DPP. And again, the companies here today are really driving a lot of the thinking around what will be a significant part of the market. You know, this market that we're in, the circularity market, the refurbished market, the trade-in market, is fraught with complexity and dynamism and opportunity. This is one part of the puzzle, but hopefully we'll kind of bring out in this session the importance of that part of the puzzle. Before I go into the market setting, Josh is going to give a very quick overview of DPP without kind of stealing the thunder from the rest of the session, but a quick overview of what we mean by DPP and sort of where it sits.
How quick is quick, Simon? Particularly given the accurate framing you just gave, which is not only is there a confusion tax in the consumer realm, but there's absolutely confusion tax in the realm of understanding DPPs. You know, I echo the thanks to All Things Circular, Rich and Peter, with the roundtable yesterday. I thought it was fantastic, and I thought it was really indicative and instructive when the first question on the roundtable was, "Hey, what's a DPP?" Right? And in fact, I heard that. You know, I was had the privilege of being at a large DPP-focused conference in Cologne last October. That was also the first question there. So you literally have a room full of DPP industry people, and the first question being, what is a DPP? So I will attempt to be very quick. DPP is at once very simple to understand at one end of the spectrum. It is also at the other end subject to a 400-page EU regulation, so clearly not that simple. Let's start with the simple end, kind of explain like I'm five. Super simple. You all have a passport. It gets stamps when you go places. That's it, right? You're all familiar with Carfax, I assume. I would hope. Perhaps those of us not outside the United States less so, but Carfax been around for decades. Everything that's happened to your vehicle, right? It truly is that simple. Next level down, kind of explain like I'm maybe 25. Two key words that you should understand, traceability or tracing and tracking. Really two simple concepts. Traceability, what went into the thing, right? What stuff went in to make it. And tracking, what happened after the stuff went in to make it, right? What happened with the thing in the rest of its life. Super simple concepts applied to a DPP. What that means is you got a passport, it's got stamps on it, get stamps when the stuff is made, the thing is made, what went into it, get stamps on every other step of the journey. If I can have maybe 45 more seconds, to make that extremely concrete, because again, I agree that it's often spoken about in the abstract, to make that extremely concrete for our industry. And if we had a whiteboard here, any of us could trivially draw the life cycle of a device, right? Start with the design and development of it, the manufacturing, the sourcing, the first launch of it, the forward logistics, the acquisition of it, the first sale. Now it's in use in the hands of consumer. One hallmark of connected devices is that they're pretty complex. They have stuff happen to them when they're in the hands of a consumer. Software updates, for example. Adverse events, warranty claims, insurance claims, non-adverse events, trade-ins, like the subject of the previous session, upgrades, lease returns. Device comes back into the supply chain, and then everything that happens on reverse, return processes, refurbishment, reuse. That would be a trivial thing, I think, for all of us to draw that life cycle, and I think most of us would get it roughly right. If you threw a dart and hit anywhere in that life cycle, underneath that dart is some set of stakeholders, everyone from obviously the device manufacturers to the marketplace enablers, telcos, third-party refurbishers, insurance players, traders. Underneath that dart, some subset of those stakeholders exercising some business process around that device. That business process can be expressed as a set of events, right? And a DPP is simply, if you could segment up that life cycle, you draw little circles around each major part of it. We call that a program in the DPP that we call device passport, right? So we level it all down to a program. Some programs are really obvious because the industry also calls them broadly programs, so trade-in programs, insurance programs, but really you can call everything a program. You have a sourcing program when you go to manufacture the device. You have a manufacturing program. You have a sales program. In the context of a program, you have events being executed by some set of stakeholders, and device passport or a DPP for the device industry is simply the tracking and traceability of everything that happens throughout that. There's a ton of complexity in all the governance and privacy implications, but that sit below that somewhat, I hope, concrete explanation that we'll dive into, but that's it. It's that simple.
Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, let me give kind of an overview of the market, really leading in to this idea of where DPP can address a key part of the market. I'm going to be putting my hand up every so often because I don't have a clicker. Yeah, can you put there? Thank you very much. So really high level, where is this market that we are operating in at the moment as an industry? This is the worldwide refurbished smartphone market globally. Last year, we had this pegged at the total secondhand market at just under 340 million units. But really the key figure that we're focused on is the light blue segment, the 109 million units that we call the organized secondary market. You could also call it the refurbished market, in the sense that all of those devices have been collected in some way via a trade-in program. They've been tested, they've been wiped, they've been graded, and critically, they will have a warranty attached to it. And that's really what we call refurbished. Now, you know, part of the theme on this panel is there's lots of terms that are flown around this industry, and some people would say, well, no, I don't consider that refurbished. For argument's sake, we're going to call it refurbished, okay? But it's critically different to the unorganized market, which you could look at it as a sort of channel level in the sense that it's peer-to-peer transactions. It's one person to another via a digital platform like eBay, or physical, which we see in lots of parts of the market, message boards and all this kind of stuff. Or it's a phone repair store, which, this is, as you can see in the chart, this is where the vast majority of volume of secondhand devices changes hands globally, and where money is spent. It is in that unorganized market. But it's the organized market where we see the direction of travel. So, overall, you see the secondhand market growing. I think you'll look at that chart and say that is not an exciting chart. That's not the kind of growth as an industry we would like to see. We would like to see steeper curves than that. But the reality is, this is part of a wider mobile devices market that's struggling, that's down. And the flagships are doing well, the Samsungs and Apples are doing well. Many of the other companies are struggling. So the overall market is very sluggish, and the secondhand market keeps chipping away in almost all regions that you can think of, right? And then within that, the organized market or the refurbished market takes share from that peer-to-peer and small independent shop segment. So, what that's telling you is there's a trust point. People are, or a risk point. People, when they're given the option of saying, do you want a low-risk transaction or a high-risk transaction? You can go to a peer-to-peer transaction and you're taking risk. You might get a better price, but you're taking risk. Where consumers have the option, they will generally, according to the market data, favor a big brand offering them a refurbished offering. There is also another point in terms of that shift, and it is supply-driven. You've now got the big carriers, the big OEMs, the big retailers, the big retail chains moving into this market because it's the market forces. They're seeing their traditional revenues falling and no real sign that that's going to change, and this market is doing very well. We're just looking at volume here. When you look at prices, in some markets, the growth is absolutely phenomenal. So people are spending, $400, $500 on a refurbished smartphone in many markets, and that's why the big players are getting involved as well. So it's supply-driven, it's market-driven. People like less risk, and they like this market. But it's fair to say that when you look at this at a country level, refurbished doesn't exist in many markets. It's absolutely tiny. There's still huge opportunity. In Western Europe, in North America, we see this refurbished market, but actually in many markets, there's a second-hand market, but not a refurbished market. And, I would say the US market is a relatively weak refurbished market. You have a lot of supply, but a lot of it leaves the US. The US, like markets like Japan, are just incredibly good at selling you new devices, via the carrier relationship. They push you flagships. It does incredibly well. And the appetite for refurbished and secondhand is not there, unlike markets like Europe. And you can see that appetite in terms of price. People in some markets are paying huge amounts of money to get access to the latest refurbished devices. And that's why the US exports to many of those markets. So lots of different dynamics at different country levels. If you can just flick on the next slide. Some of that detail will be too small for some of you in the audience, but one of the big trends that we are seeing is the memory crisis. And by the way, you'll say, well, that's not a new theme, Simon. People have been talking about that for months now. And that is true. But I think what is significant is the severity and the uncertainty around this is very much unknown. This problem is spiraling out of control, right? Demand for NAND flash chips and DRAM to go into AI data farms is not stabilizing. This big bubble that we're all aware of is driving the demand for these components to the point where they're completely out of reach at costs that have been seen for the handset makers. So the handset makers are in a difficult position, and not just handset makers, laptop makers in particular as well. So, this problem is a very real theme, and it's going to keep getting worse. And in the US, we haven't really seen it at a consumer level yet. In Western Europe, we haven't seen it at the consumer level yet. The reason we're showing an Indian chart here from our research is because some markets are at the very sharp end of this problem. They are characterized by being low-end markets where those vendors can't absorb those costs. The operator doesn't sell the devices to consumers. They're all bought outright, $50, $100 handsets. So when the memory cost increases within the BOM, you see it straight away in the market. And what you're seeing there is, prices of new handsets being 50, 60, 70% higher than the previous model a year ago. Every month you're seeing these increases. So we're seeing this, and by the way, it will come to all markets. And Apple's announcement that they will be increasing prices, that announcement came much quicker than we expected. It's going to affect all manufacturers, and we're going to see those impacts over the next few months. And when prices increase, consumers will delay purchase. They'll trade down where they can, and they will consider alternatives. And there's no question that within that, refurbished comes heavily within the mix. There's other things that will be considered. But the industry action is significant, and we're talking to operators in Europe, in Asia, and in various markets, as well as the OEMs and the large retailers. And they're very, very, very concerned about this problem, because fundamentally, the under $500 handset market is 80% of global demand. It's not that share in the US or in parts of Western Europe, but globally it's a huge portion. Even in most of Europe, it's a big portion, and a lot of that is wiped out over the next year. So how do you serve those customers? And they're looking at affordability schemes like financing and things like that, but refurbished is heavily within the mix. But with all this in mind, the market's going to fall, right? And already in places like India and Asia, in our research, you're looking at 10, 20, 30% declines this year, and we're expecting the US and other markets to fall as well. Alongside that, you have this challenge of, well, it's all well and good saying there's going to demand on refurbished, but the supply is a big problem. And our assumption is that, excuse me, trade-in volume will struggle this year for a couple of reasons. One, I've just highlighted, if sales of new devices is falling, that's the upgrade opportunity to trade in your devices. So if people are buying less new devices, the trade-in volume will be negatively affected. Attach rates for trade-in in most markets outside the US and Japan are pitifully low, 40, 50, 60% in the US and Japan, but under 5% in lots of major markets in Europe. So the tie rate is very low, and what companies are finding is changing that behavior is very, very difficult. So you've got already a tie rate challenge, but what this chart is showing, and Craig mentioned this in the last session, is tie rates in the US are going to be under pressure because suddenly you've got the carriers are decoupling this trade-in requirement. They're saying, renew with us, come to our network, but you don't need to trade in anymore. They're getting rid of that barrier because of the intensity of competition in the US market. So you've got a worrying sign. But luckily in America, you do have that behavior. And that's the hardest thing to manage. How do you get consumers to think, okay, I'm coming to upgrade, I'm going to trade in my phone. You've got that behavior, but the tie rate is expected to drop based on our assumption. So you've got a real challenge because a lot of the world relies on US volume exports. But overall, we're expecting the refurbished market to grow by about 10% this year. Now just changing shift, and I know you're not going to be able to see that. But we've included the content so that you can be having this as a takeaway afterwards. It's really about this point around then consumer trust. From a consumer perspective, and Stephen highlighted this with some of the research we did for them in the previous presentation as well, and this is a sort of other view based on a different methodology. But buying used devices comes with risk and uncertainty versus buying new devices. That's a really obvious statement to say. But when there's risk, people will pay less or they just won't purchase at all. and that is the lost revenue that we look at. And again, it comes out in lots of quant surveys. This is based on qualitative research that we've been doing with Apkudo, and it demonstrates lost revenue. Simple as that. Lower prices and lower sales. So we're attempting to unpick this with new research that we're doing with Apkudo at the moment to really understand what is that confusion tax put on the industry, because consumers fundamentally don't know what a grade means from one player to another, or they fundamentally don't know what the battery health is of the device and so on. We're halfway through it. We've just done loads of focus groups in Japan, in Germany, UK, and the US, and we're going to be doing a quant survey in the next couple of months, and we're going to be, from that, generating a view on what is lost revenue to the industry based on the confusion tax. But just unpicking some of the themes here, battery health is particularly important. Again, to people in the industry, you might say, well, yeah, okay, maybe that does make sense to us, but that information isn't available to consumers generally when they're buying a device online. It's particularly important. It's kind of like when you buy a car, you associate the mileage with the health of the car, or at least most people do. The battery is that proxy for the health of the mobile phone. Parts and repair is another major issue for consumers. Post-warranty failure is another concern, and channel trust is another major theme. Not on here is also the grading point that I mentioned, that, again, Stephen mentioned this, but fair or good for most consumers, based on the research we did, really means very little to consumers. What does a fair device mean if I'm looking at Amazon or one player or another player? So, these are very rational concerns that the industry has. If you can flick it on, please. Is that the next one? Oh, yeah, that's it. There we go. Thank you. So then what does that mean in terms of that tax, in terms of that lost business because of that confusion? It has very real consequences. And there's 4 key behaviors that came out from the focus groups that we've done. People delay purchase, they hesitate, or they just wait. They trade up. Now you might say, well, that's a good thing, isn't it? But invariably they just say, well, if I don't know what I'm getting from a grade B or a fair, I'm just going to get something that's something a bit better. But that grade B could be very, very good, but you're not able to sell it. They're switching to new devices. So that comes out loud and clear. They say, well, there's just too much risk here, so I'm just going to go and buy a new device, maybe a cheaper new device. Or they consider switching channels as well. Next slide, please. And by the way, this is just one small snapshot of a fairly big study, again, halfway through it. But some of the feedback you get in a focus group isn't necessarily what you'd want to hear maybe as an industry. So for example, what came out pretty loud and clear was AI had really bad connotations. If you talk about, people kept saying, I want somebody to actually sign as a person what they did on this device. And the idea of AI and so on had some challenges for some people. But they strongly supported the idea of a product passport. We had a Samsung mock-up that we presented to consumers, and it was a really strong finding of the study. Across all markets, respondents saw real value in the concept. Because it signaled transparency from their perspective, it was an example of transparency. It showed confidence in the company selling the devices, that they trusted what they were selling, they had the information, and it allowed them to make decisions from one device to another, rather than just relying on, oh, well, that one's a good, that's a fair, that's a bit more expensive, that's one, it actually gave them a basis to make decisions, much like you would with buying a car. So, but the key point here is, this is a major consumer use case, because what they told us is, once you see this detail, you wouldn't buy a used phone without that detail. So again, there's a kind of consumer use case here that could be considered a competitive advantage for companies who are offering it. Very quickly, before we dive into the questions, if we can just go on to the next slide. Really quite significant cultural differences when you look at the different countries where we did the research. In markets like Japan and Germany, where refurbished is still quite low. These are massive potential markets, absolutely enormous potential markets. But awareness is low. They don't really understand the concept. There's a real trust issue, unlike in the UK and US, where there was an awareness about it. They understood it a little bit more. But yeah, trust is a big problem in Japan and in Germany. And fundamentally, it's I think a characteristic of German consumers. They need more detail. I think British and American consumers are maybe suckers for marketing materials, whereas the German consumers were saying, I don't want a tick. I want to know what that tick means. I want to know the data. I want to know who verified that data. And they kept saying, we need more, we need more, we need more. So some real differences, I think, between some of the countries. But high level, really the overview here is that as an industry, we're at a very interesting point in the development of this market. Trust is slowing down adoption, and DPP, based on this first part of the research, could have a positive impact in terms of driving that change. There we go. Now we can go dive into questions. Okay, maybe I can just start by, I guess, focusing on the trust topic. I've kind of presented a view from a consumer perspective, but maybe you can kind of highlight some examples where you see trust affecting the market today. Maybe Sean, I can kind of just come down from your side.
Yeah, am I on? There we go. Yeah, certainly there's the consumer end. They're wanting more data, but selfishly on the B2B side, we still suffer from marketing words and not facts. It's getting better, but it is still not clear. So bringing this to the market is really important for adding that transparency, because you'll know exactly what you're getting. We can't do that yet today. There's still a bit of hedging and guessing going on, which really makes it inefficient. There's double and triple work being done because it is not transparent.
And out of interest, how does that manifest in terms of day-to-day transactions in the industry? Is it just a known thing that you're telling me you're selling me whatever volume of a certain grade, but fundamentally we both know that there's a portion that will just not be what you're telling me, and that's just a known fact.
There's some hedging that definitely happens. Experience can set the value of a future transaction. So there's just time and experience, which is a barrier of entry. It makes it harder to bring new customers in, and that'll trickle down to the consumer transaction.
Very good. There's layers to that too, right? So if you think about the building blocks of trust, it starts with triage, right? When you get the product back in, whoever is doing your triage for you does an assessment of the device's condition. What level of trust do you have in that triager that what they said is what it is and what it will be? One of the things that I hate, just absolutely can't stand, is mixed lots. Not only mixing of product, but also mixing of grade. And then what's worse is then you have no transparency into this is what you were saying, Simon. If you're selling a lot of Galaxy S22 Ultra 256 grade A, the key phrasing there is yield. What is your yield of A that's going to come out of that lot? And back to the triage, who did it, right? So B-Stock is my auction provider, and on every single B-Stock auction, it has the location of where the device currently sits. And I asked Sean a long time ago, like, what do you put the location on there for? What does that matter? And he said shipping and a couple other obvious things. But what he said really is like, so they know who triaged it, right? And if you have a bad triager based on, oh, it's in this city, or oh, it's in that city, like good city, good triage, bad city, bad triage, they will price in their yield, right? So if they know that they're bidding on S22 Ultra 256A, they will say, okay, well, this was triaged by this facility in this place, and their yield is really bad. So I'm going to pretend that I'm going to only get maybe 30% A's. And there's going to be some mix of B and some mix of C, and I'm going to cost average that down to minimize my risk. Without that transparency, the prices and the residual values continue to go down and down and down. Adding trust and transparency back into this ecosystem, starting with triage, starting with aligned grading standards, is critical, but adding that transparency to the buyer, whether it's a B2B buyer on an auction marketplace, or if it's a direct-to-consumer buyer as it ends up in the final life cycle of the supply chain, is critical, because customers then will not have to worry about yield. They can truly price the device what the market says it's worth. And there's not this guessing game of who did it. Is it good? Is it bad? What am I getting? I don't know. What programs can I apply these products that I'm buying into? What channels can I put them back into? Adding that trust and transparency is key, and will drive up the residual values, which, to the session that we had previously, higher residual value means higher trade-in value, which means more value to the customer, which means lower barrier to entry, which means more products that are accessible in the market. And the virtuous cycle goes on and on and on. Without that, the customers just have a guessing game, and that's not what we want.
And can I just touch on one point there? So, a number of devices aren't triaged is the key point. And that comes to a point in the previous session as well, I think, in terms of velocity. And that's a key factor. And I guess robotics come in to help in terms of more devices being triaged as one factor, because that's still a big challenge, just the amount of devices that just aren't triaged, or a company's choosing not to triage because fundamentally they are just trying to push stock.
Or the level of triage that they choose or elect to perform, right? So if you think about within the word triage, you've got manual triage, you've got robotics and automation. The manual triage accuracy is something like, 40 or 50%. The CTIA grading scales have been published and put out so that even if you're not a robot and you can't program it in, we've put training out there to help improve that percentage, but it's still never going to get more than 60% or something, right? Because you have human operators, maybe someone's having a bad day, maybe their boyfriend or girlfriend broke up with them, maybe they're hungry, maybe they're trying to get through to their shift, right? Like go to take a break. Like, the human element of manual triage is so inconsistent and will never be any higher than a threshold that we would deem to be accurate. That's where robots do come in. But what level of investment does the triage operator want to make, right? Are they willing and able to invest in the robots and the automation and the processes that go along with that, so that your yield can be higher, right? And your confidence score that you can put into these digital product passports can be higher. I think the passport will, once we have it live, and you'll see examples of this here in a minute, I think it will push the people in the supply chain to do better, right? To perform better, to have better quality triage, have better quality product that they put out there, because you're not going to be able to hide, right? There's a lot of unscrupulous actors out there in the gray market. Rich talked about in his masterclass yesterday. Gray market, you can call it gray, or I think there's even a black market of bad actors out there that are putting fake parts in devices. They're calling things triaged when they haven't actually triaged it. And there's, not to quote Ghostbusters, but who are you going to call, right? Like there's no watchdog, there's no audit, there's no check. And there's been for many, many years, a number of really good, consistent players in the space. And then just a handful that just continue to fluctuate in and out. New LLCs come up all the time, new operators come up all the time, and they're just looking for a quick and easy buck. And I think this will eliminate those bad actors. They're not going to be able to hide anymore.
Absolutely. And that touches on a really important theme in this industry that's becoming acutely significant, again, especially in Europe. And it is about fraud, and it is about products coming from various countries, hubs, acting as a hub to kind of move these devices out. But fraud is a major, major challenge in this industry that's just growing at the moment. And that is creating a further kind of challenge on the industry from a price point and various other aspects. Can I just ask Josh, from your perspective, when we think about the trust and transparency point, there are the kind of two levels we've talked about here. One is, again, from a kind of consumer perspective, I guess, or an end user perspective, it kind of raising the tide, improving trust, more demand, everyone benefits, or growing the pie for everyone. But the other aspect is about the transactions within the business and the trade and so on. I don't know, do you kind of pinpoint where you see the trust point being more acute or anything along those lines?
Yes. So hard to beat a Ghostbusters quote, but I'll give it a whirl. I think what you're hearing here, you heard earlier 2 keywords from me, traceability and tracking, within which to understand DPPs. You just heard another 2 from Craig and Sean here, which is truth and trust, right? And making that really concrete, linking those 2 concepts, making it really concrete in the context of device passport is one of the things that our device passport infrastructure does is assigns a confidence metric to each and every data element that gets pumped into the data spaces infrastructure. We'll touch on exactly what data spaces means a little bit later. But every source of every data element that in any way gives insight into the tracking and traceability, the first 2 concepts, carries with it some element of ground truth, right? But that ground truth must be accompanied by a determination of trust. And it's very complex the way that the infrastructure determines that. But Craig touched on a couple of examples of it where clearly, all other things being equal, clearly you can trust a objective robot more than you can trust a subjective human, as an example, right? Clearly, all other things being equal, you can trust ground truth state of a device that was assessed just yesterday more than you can trust ground truth state of a device that was assessed 3 months ago, particularly if you don't know what has happened to that device since then, right? All of these elements get combined and contribute to a determination of the trust that you may have in ground truth, and where the rubber really meets the road in that sort of kind of context to then answer your question, which is it is absolutely imperative for us as an industry to find ways to present ground truth to consumers in a digestible format, right? And that's a really hard thing to do. Initiatives like the CTIA grading scales are a tremendous step forward, and there's now a focus from that same standards body on pushing it further even more into a common consumer language that consumers can understand. That's tremendously hard work. It's absolutely necessary. It's not sufficient though, in that the consumer touch point with the device is just at one point in the flow, right? What needs to back the derivation or kind of the projection of the ground truth with a confidence metric, what needs to back presenting that consumer, however you present to that consumer, is a supply chain. And that's all of us in this room right now are that supply chain. So again, directly answering your question, every step prior to that interaction point with the consumer, every transaction that occurs between those set of stakeholders, many of which are in this room, at every major program in the device contributes ground truth data with a trust metric that leads up to the derivation of which is presented to the consumer. So all of that is what's important. Obviously, the consumer touch point is critical. That's rubber meets the road on the device being reused. That's what we're all here for, right? And reuse means getting it back in the hands of the consumer. But it's every step that comes before that's critical.
Okay, very good, thank you. So, you know, when we think about DPPs, I mean, I'm amazed when we had a session back at Circular Markets back in February, how much has moved on even since then. You know, it's really gained quite a bit of momentum since then. But and now people are sort of saying, okay, there's a regulation point that we need to be aware of, but there is also a commercial opportunity and various use cases in terms of using DPP. But kind of just getting a sense of what's the biggest single driver of where we are with DPP today, you know, in terms of the manifestation of a DPP. You know, I don't know, where do you see DPP today in terms of a market reality?
Yeah, there's really 2 drivers that are happily coalescing. One is the regulatory tailwinds from the EU, right? That's giving kind of a critical context for the driver DPPs across all industries. Ours happens under those regulations to have till roughly 2030 to get there, which is great. But we cannot ignore that regulatory reality, and that's really what has at the highest possible level kind of injected the term DPPs into industries, right? So that's kind of driver one. In our industry in particular, though, what we're really fortunate, there's several things that we're fortunate, I feel, as an industry. And the second driver for us is something that you just at a high level touched on, which is growing sophistication of our industry. And not only growing sophistication, but growing acceleration of that sophistication, right? It took 30 years to get to the point of a CTIA grading standard, and it's taken only 2 years to get to just a remarkable accomplishment of so many stakeholders coming together from all different stakeholder segments to make an agreement and significantly push the ball forward. I suspect it's only going to take another 6 months to advance that to the next level. So the acceleration is accelerating of sophistication, and that's a tremendous coalescing point, I feel, around DPPs. That once you've got this tremendous regulatory pressure, 2030 is just around the corner. Meeting the moment of an industry where sophistication is accelerating, right? The real opportunity we have as an industry is to get ahead of that regulation, right? I don't think there's ever been an instance where industries getting ahead of regulation has not been a good thing, as opposed to the regulation being the dog that wags the tail, right? So I think those are the two key drivers, and I think we're tremendously fortunate as an industry to be at the moment that we are.
Very good. And yeah, Craig. Yeah.
I'll add one complimentary one to that, in agreement with you, but the residual value is key for me as a seller of the product, and I think to many in the room who are watching online, buyers and sellers of the product, this has a real material impact to you and your business. Because you should be able to see lifts of anywhere between, depending upon where you're selling, between 10 to 20% value increase. And I think that we're seeing that in these early pilots where customers are seeing this transparency and are willing to pay more. Your survey data says that, your focus group data says that, willing to pay more for the product because they know what they're getting. They don't have to worry about returns. And as I mentioned in the previous session, and I'll say it again, our friends from Circana do excellent research every year that continues to tell us that purchasers of used smartphones do 2-3x, whatever it is, more research than those who buy new. And so this is that level of research for them to do. The other thing is, because they do that research, it does increase the buying cycle time. So we all know that time is money, and the faster we're able to deplete these devices, the more recovery value we have. Providing a tool that is a trustworthy data source of what ground truth data of what the product actually is should, in theory, shorten that buying cycle time, which means more product is moving through your channels and out your doors and off of your PDPs and into customer hands faster, right? And that's good for all of us, especially those of us in the circular economy ecosystem. So the faster we move the product, the better it gets into the customer hands faster, and then the values go up, which means we can invest more, and the cycle goes on and on and on. And so, Sean, I think for you as a marketplace seller, that's higher GMVs, that's less returns. That's, I mean, tell us, Sean, like why does it, tell us all the beauties of what it means to you.
Yeah, the dirty capitalists in the room. I mean, we know
we all are.
Yeah, we all know, like intuitively we say like transparency is going to drive the value up, but there's even still a fear at the carrier level, like, no, I just want to sell it like this. I don't really want to know. So this push is helpful because it enables somebody like us to go, no, here is the monetary value. By doing this, there is an increase in that residual value for every device you do this. Yes, you might know that something is more broken than you thought it is, but that's okay. It doesn't just take the floor out of the value. It lifts really all boats. So, I mean, we've seen it even from back when it was just grab bags of phones. Even implementing grading standards would take prices up 10-15%, like in the B2B market. So this is just incremental because we're taking, there's the trust and transparency, but the sophistication also comes with efficiency. If we begin to trust a triage, then I don't have to do it again. Because today there's a lot of testing and retesting, and I don't believe it, so I'm going to do it at my place. So it's just going to bring efficiency, which means values come up.
And can I put both of you on the spot and ask when you would be implementing DPP at the front end? Like that was a mock-up that we showed in the consumer research, but do you have a sense of when you will be kind of showing that kind of information on Samsung.com?
Yeah, as soon as humanly possible. Like we're in commercial negotiations now, and my plan is to be first to market with this. There's a lot of, as Josh mentioned, regulatory issues and things, but I want Samsung to be at the forefront of this truth and transparency and creating this circular ecosystem for our customers, whether they be B2B or B2C. So in partnership with Apkudo and with Bstock, you should see this pilot very soon.
Okay, very good. That answers both, I guess.
I concur.
You concur, very good. Well, one thing I want to touch on, it came out quickly yesterday, and I'm not going to dwell on it because of time, but it is about the different use cases of a DPP. You know, we've talked about the consumer use case. We talked about the B2B use case in terms of margin, residual value, and so on. But they're very different use cases, looking at different information within the DPP. And there are other use cases. Again, it was kind of discussed yesterday around even why regulations even exist. Is for tracking devices. It's a tax incentive for a government in terms of understanding the devices that are coming in and out of a particular market. And we've also talked about fraud as well being a very significant factor of bad actors. And by the way, no bad actor thinks they're a bad actor. So as this kind of plays out, people will be saying, is this good for me or is this bad for me? You know, to give you an example, Europe relies on, as we've talked about, almost 40-50% of their used devices come from North America. Those devices aren't supposed to be in Europe. They don't come with the official CE mark. So DPP might be bad for that situation. Now, by the way, everyone in Europe, bar a few companies, would say, yeah, we need those devices. So if DPP kind of prevents this, that's bad. I'm just trying to, you know, the DPP will flush out a lot of information and it will expose a lot, but there's different use cases is, I guess, the one quick point I wanted to highlight. Conscious of 5 minutes, but where do you see the greatest resistance? Or if we think about it as barriers, and if we think about, you know, one theme around data privacy in particular, which has come out, you know, the phone industry in particular, with IMEI numbers linked to people's personal information is a real challenge, especially, you know, we talk a lot about the car industry. The big difference with the car industry and the mobile industry is the flow of devices globally. So a phone could end up in France, in Africa, and a DPP could, if not managed well, expose a lot of information potentially. And that, I think, is a theme that has been coming out. But do you see that as being a real barrier? It is
without a doubt, absolutely. And maybe just to formalize that barrier, it's that you've got a tremendously competitive industry, which it should be, that benefits all of us, in particular consumers. You've got this ongoing push, as we spoke about earlier, an ongoing kind of tide being raised in terms of sophistication, and you've got a number of dynamics within that absolutely need to be addressed. I think the biggest one side of the coin is viewed as a barrier. The other side is viewed as an opportunity and an answer to that barrier. Is neutrality, right? And the desire, we heard this from the workshop yesterday. The desire, it seems very natural to have this desire that a neutral party is the operator of the DPP for the industry, right? We are tremendously fortunate. I mentioned earlier that we're fortunate in a number of ways as an industry. Here's one: we're tremendously fortunate that there is a single global authority that issues all the way at the beginning of life of the device, the cradle stage of the device, that issues the identity set under which a connected device may be manufactured, and that is the GSMA, right? And that's just a phenomenal, not only achievement for us as an industry, but an opportunity for us as an industry to have an independent, neutral body that already does this, right? They already control and regulate and enact the standards and manage the issuance of the identity set at the cradle stage of the device. That's the natural party to be the neutral body that governs it the rest of the way through. And it's why we announced just yesterday with the GSMA our pilot of device passport with them, specifically around the very first use case. Very funny word called homologation, right? It's a great term. But very first use case, which is simply has this device even been manufactured, right? Does it even exist? And I think it's funny in the context of, and really is quite curious, in the context of an industry context of such significant sophistication and accelerating sophistication that we spoke about earlier, that the simple question of, does this thing even exist, is still needing to be asked and answered by regulators and governments and other stakeholders globally. So that's where we're starting. That's where the GSMA is starting. But I think we're tremendously fortunate to have that single global authority, and I think that certainly gives me extremely high hopes that the notion of an industry getting ahead of those regulations for our industry more than any other, that is possible.
More specifically, and agree with you, but for those in the room, I think a barrier is, well, how do I participate? Like if I'm a trader, if I am a processor, if I am a software company, how do I participate in the global device passport ecosystem? That's going to be a barrier that we all need to get over, because I'm still having trouble as the co-chair of the CTIA grading standards with getting people to adopt the standard. So please adopt the standard. But then also think about how I can apply that standard into a future digital device passport. I think Apkudo, I'll give them credit, because it's not the Apkudo device passport, it's device passport powered by Apkudo, right? They are operating with the GSMA in partnership rather than making it their own thing. It is something that they are giving to the industry and sharing out with all and making it accessible and available to all. So that to me is why I am choosing to partner with Apkudo on this partnership, because this is something that will be free and open to everyone to participate and to upload data. Who touched it? Where did you do with it? Where did you do it? What did you do? All the things, all the device attributes, all the device touches will be available. And that transparency, we talked about trust, but that transparency has to exist at all levels and all touches of the ecosystem. From birth, as an OEM, I will upload my data into that, all the way to death. If you're an end user recycler that's recovering rare earth minerals and you're going to end it, and that TAC range should never be activated ever again. There's so many different touch points along the way. Every single touch point has got to participate. If you find yourself not participating, I think you're going to find yourself on the outs, because customers will want this confidence. They will want this passport to drive their purchasing decisions. And if you're not a part of that, you may find your business not doing the volume that you had before.
Thank you. I want to touch on one quick thing quickly before I do the final question. Bob hooks me off, but and it kind of touched on your point there, Craig, but it's about accessibility of the data. And this is coming into the spaces point, but any company's willingness to share data will have to depend on who's going to be seeing that data. And that's a big complexity in the industry, one of those big barriers that you've been talking about, Josh, and maybe you want to share.
Yeah, that fundamental challenge, which is really rooted in the keyword there means sovereignty of the data, the ownership that you have in your data, and your varying levels of willingness to both share it, and that can be both a binary decision, do I share it or do I not, with who, but it's even more complex than that. It can be a granularity decision. I am happy to share that I repaired this device. I'm happy to declare the authorized components I used to repair it, but I may not be happy to share the specific facility location, but I may, at some level of granularity, be happy to share the country that I did it in, right? All of that, the notion of sovereignty, and the second keyword being federation of that data with strict governance and controls around it, demands a very sophisticated infrastructure. And many reasons for us to feel fortunate as an industry. There is a set of infrastructure principles that have been ideated on for many years and formalized into what's called data spaces, headlined by the IDSA, the National Data Spaces Association. And that is what device passport, those principles and that architecture that device passport is built upon. And at the highest possible level, that's really quite simple. You own your data. You have an isolated data space that is truly yours, is only accessible to you, and you can federate out of that with strict controls under your decision what data, to whom, and at what level of granularity your data is shared.
And Apkudo has been great in this process. He's not just saying that I have full control over, I want this to move this here, I don't want this shown, I do want this shown. It is in the most truest sense of what Josh has said, that data sovereignty and that federation of data is so critical to me, because there are some things that I want visible and some things that I don't. But having a global standard that can look at the whole thing that's neutral, I feel good about, and I think others should too.
And the theory would be that the GSMA would be the operator of that. You might be the technical enabler, as maybe other companies, but GSMA would be the enabler of those, or the operator of those spaces.
That's right. We're simply the infrastructure. We're the AWS, right?
Perfect. Thank you very much. One final question, if I could just go down the row, maybe starting with you, Sean. What's the one change the industry needs to make in the next 3 years to address this point of transparency and trust? And you can't all just say DPP.
I think that was the all of the above answer. No, I think it kind of goes back into the sophistication piece. Like the more that the data and robotic solutions like are prevalent throughout the industry, it will enable us to have this data and build the industry trust that the passport actually, the phone is what the passport says. So having that sophistication continue to grow so we can trust it is vital.
Thank you.
I think that at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, there are layers, right? And if you don't have, not to keep harping on it, but if you don't have a good consistent standard, and when I say standards, I don't just mean the grading scales. I also mean, what do you call the product, the marketing terms, the product attributes. You have to have consistency in your data, and you have to have a standard of what the device is, so that what the data that you're putting into the digital product passports makes sense and can be compared, right, as it moves through every chain in the ecosystem. If I call it a Galaxy S21 space 5G and you call it a Galaxy S21, is that because it's a 4G phone, or is it a 5G phone, or did you just leave off the 5G? Is my A+ the same as your A+? All of these things matter when it comes to following a device through its birth and death life cycle. So creating a standard, not just the grading standard, that's very important, but the standard of terms across OEMs, across platforms, across countries is absolutely critical, because otherwise this data will become untenable and you won't be able to do anything with it. So standards matter.
Thank you. Josh?
Craig said, who are you going to call? And I appreciate the Ghostbusters quote. But I would say that it behooves the industry, in answer to the question, as what is the single thing the industry needs to do over the next 3 years? I would say it's in 3 years' time, we're all sitting here and there's a very strict answer to who you're going to call.
Very good. Good answer. Well, I'd like to thank Sean, Craig, and Josh. I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and thanks for sticking around and listening.